Dear YouTube, as you know, under copyright law, I am allowed to use portions of copyrighted material, in this case, copyrighted material belonging to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, so long as this is used for the purpose of criticism and parody. Please remember this when Watchtower comes complaining, because I've embarrassed them by using their propaganda in a way they disapprove of. Thank you.
Welcome to another edition of
the John Cedars channel, specifically my rebuttals to JW Broadcasting episodes, and as you can see, this month's episode is a doozy. Once again, we've got Stephen Lett with his wide-eyed facial mannerisms to liven up what would ordinarily be just a bog-standard propaganda session. So without further ado, let's see what wisdom Stephen has to impart to us.
My theme for this month's broadcast is Young Ones. Build your future with Jehovah. If you do, 1 Timothy 6:19 assures that you will safely treasure up for yourself a fine foundation for the future, and you will get a firm hold on the real life.
By the way, I hope you guys don't mind if I've just zoomed in a little bit there on Stephen's face. If you compare my video with the original video, you'll see that quite often he's quite far away from the camera, and I can't help but wonder whether that, at least in Stephen's case, Watchtower is very grateful to have his face as far away from the camera as possible. I think that Stephen's face is a work of art personally and needs to be closer. So I have edited certain parts of his speech so that he's actually closer to the camera, albeit in slightly lower resolution, but I think it improves the video. Anyway, Stephen's talk is apparently directed at young ones, and young ones are encouraged to build their future with Jehovah, which essentially means give all of their potential and opportunities and strength and vitality and energy and resourcefulness and everything to Watchtower. That's essentially what is needed, what Watchtower wants from young ones. And we've had it in so many broadcasting episodes now. I mean, how many do we need? I would suggest that this is something that Watchtower is really keen on, and is keen on trying to keep and retain as many young ones as possible and convert them as quickly as possible into essentially drones to, help promote their work. The sooner they can do that, the sooner they can stop them from, say, starting a career or going to college or university, the more likelihood there is that they've got them for life. So that's essentially what this talk is about.
Personally, I am so thankful to Jehovah that positive peer pressure was put on me to enter the pioneer ministry right out of high school. What a blessing and a protection it was to enter the regular pioneer work at age 17 and to be able to go to Bethel at 18.
So Stephen here is using quite a familiar tactic now for governing body members, and that's to say, it worked for me, therefore it will automatically work for you. We've seen similar things said by, for example, Mark Sanderson when he was talking about how he got baptized at an insanely young age and it was the best decision he ever made. And because he made that decision, everyone else should make it too. Well, Stephen Lett is making the same argument here. Look, I started regular pioneer work right out of high school at the age of 17. Therefore, all of you should too. Well, what works for him won't necessarily work for everyone else. And in Stephen's case, as sincere as he may be, some of you will say he isn't sincere in giving that advice, it's terrible advice, because when you are young, you should be learning. and you should be accumulating as many opportunities as you can to have a good career and to be able to provide for both yourself and any family that you end up having. So for Stephen to be saying, no, 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 put all of that on hold and serve this organisation is deeply selfish. But it threads through the entire talk. In fact, it threads through most of what Watchtower has to say to young people in its literature. And you will also notice the expression positive peer pressure, which I actually flagged that one because it's not an expression that you hear that often. I just now jumped on Watchtower Library, and if you put into quotes positive peer pressure in the search bar, you'll find only a handful of times that Watchtower has used that expression, because obviously it frequently talks about peer pressure in a negative light. So in other words, be careful, young Jehovah's Witnesses, because when you are speaking to and making friends with, worldly witness children, you are at risk of their peer pressure being exerted on you to do bad things. But if it's Watchtower, and if it's things that benefit Watchtower, suddenly it becomes positive peer pressure. And I don't need to explain to you that that is entirely arbitrary. It's entirely arbitrary for Watchtower to say, if it's what we think is good, then it's positive. Well, I would argue that a lot of what Watchtower urges young people to do is actually negative, especially when it comes to sacrificing their lives for an organization.
Even though there was considerable worldly pressure put on me to pursue university education, I am so happy that with Jehovah's help, I decided to build my future with Jehovah.
If by any chance you happen to be watching this video and you are a young Jehovah's Witness with the potential, say, to go to college or university, maybe you're weighing up whether to commit yourself to pioneer service or to a life as a Jehovah's Witness, or whether to keep your options open and perhaps pursue higher education. If you're in that situation, I'd like to speak to you now and ask you to just dwell on what Stephen has just said, because he is insinuating, or not really insinuating, just outright saying that he was pressurized, he was put under worldly pressure to attend university. Now think about what that would entail. If someone is pressuring or coercing or manipulating you to do something, usually it would be with an ulterior motive. Usually it would be because it benefits them in some way. So why would somebody manipulate, coerce, pressure you to go through college or university if it's only really you who's going to benefit from it? It's you who's going to receive the paycheck from the job, the really fantastic job that you wouldn't have been able to get without going through college or university. I'm not saying that it always works out that way. I'm aware that sometimes it's hard for university graduates to get work. I appreciate that. But I think we can safely say that if you go through higher education, you are more likely to get good, well-paying jobs. So my question is, what's in it for someone who says, do that? What's in it for someone who encourages you down that path? What could their ulterior motives conceivably be? Surely it's simply a case of them wanting what's best for you, of them wanting you to excel and pursue all opportunities available to you. On the other hand, let's put that to one side and think about what we've just heard from Stephen Lett, a governing body member, who is suggesting that you don't go through college and university and instead become a pro bono publicist for Watchtower. You spend all of your time on a voluntary basis promoting an organisation that he just happens to be one of the leaders of. What's in it for him? Quite a lot. So hopefully you can understand why I feel it's not just misleading, but actually extremely hypocritical for him to insist that those who promote higher education are somehow nefarious and evil and doing things for ulterior motives, when the motives for him to advise the opposite, to advise ignoring higher education and becoming a pioneer, are obvious. So just something for you to think about if you happen to be a young Jehovah's Witness who's stumbled onto my channel. Oh, and by the way, maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad thing for Stephen Lett to go through college or university, because maybe then he would develop the skill of not speaking to his audience as though they are made up of imbeciles.
Truly, I have no regrets. And this is always true of young ones who serve Jehovah from their hearts. They have no regrets.
Excuse me, I was a Jehovah's Witness young one who was serving Jehovah out of my whole heart, doing it because I believed I genuinely was helping people and helping them avoid fiery destruction at Armageddon. I genuinely believed all that, and I gave, I think, 10 years of my life to doing that as a pioneer for Jehovah's Witnesses, and it left me with a lot of regrets. So straight away I can tell you that that part there is a lie. It's just not true. Not every young Jehovah's Witness who gets involved in pioneering ends up having no regrets, and it's silly of him to make that assertion.
In fact, you will enjoy these expressions from young ones who are building their future with Jehovah.
Before I started pioneering, I was really nervous that I wouldn't be able to get my time in every month.
It was a bit hard when I started pioneering because I didn't have a car.
My boss, he didn't give me part-time work.
I found it really hard to balance schoolwork and pioneering at the same time.
My biggest struggle was fear of man, so that really hindered me because I wasn't very good at talking to people.
Having a good routine was the struggle.
My brother and I are the only ones in the truth. My family didn't understand why we wanted to go preaching.
I didn't think that I'd make a good pioneer.
I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 5, so I was always worried about whether or not I could balance that health condition with pioneering.
Challenges don't seem that big now, but back at that time they were a really big deal. But the coolest thing was how Jehovah helped me.
Prayer to Jehovah helped me overcome my fears.
My family were a massive help from Jehovah because my dad was the one who first encouraged me to pioneer. When I did start pioneering, he promised that I would have the full support of my family.
When I spoke to brothers and sisters who spent their youth in the full-time service, that really helped me because it was really encouraging and it really motivated me to want to make my own memories and my own experiences in the full-time service.
So there were practical things I could do. When I didn't have a car, I just walked or I caught the bus. I had to work out what my priorities were first, so I had to find out how many hours did I have to go witnessing every week. So then I just sat down and I looked at every day and planned out which days I could go witnessing, which days I had to go to school, and also allocate time so that I could do my homework and study.
Having a schedule was really good because I could see it all out in front of me, and I could see that the hour requirement was actually attainable, so that made it a lot less daunting.
I first set short-term goals of pioneering in the special months of activity. Then I was able to begin continuous auxiliary, and then eventually I started regular pioneering.
One of the best things I did to prepare myself for pioneering was to auxiliary pioneer beforehand. It really set me up to be able to overcome any challenges that I faced while I was pioneering.
I thought about Malachi 3:10. I knew I trusted in Jehovah, but this was my chance to test him out.
I prayed, put my trust in Jehovah, and put my application in.
After my form was in for pioneering, my brother called me and offered me work.
I had unemployment for 3 months, which wasn't a good time. But during that time, I had Jehovah as my main focus, and so he supported me and he didn't let me down.
Asking brothers and sisters to come and work with me maybe on days that I knew that I wouldn't get as much support really helped. That helped me to organise my hours a little bit more, and also I'd get to know my brothers and sisters more as well.
One of the greatest joys of pioneering has been to pioneer with Mum. And we had the privilege of going to the pioneer school together, which was really special.
Psalm 16 verse 8 reminds me that Jehovah is right beside me. When I'm preaching, it's like Jehovah is holding my hand.
So with full-time service, I love making Jehovah happy. With everything that he's given me, I'm finally able to give something back.
Looking back, pioneering, it was the best decision I've ever made. It's opened up so many different avenues of service to Jehovah, and it helped me also to have that real desire to want to stay in full-time service.
Helping someone on the road to everlasting life, it's the best feeling ever, and it's really irreplaceable.
The only thing I can say, as a young person, start pioneering.
What a fine attitude those young ones have.
Yes, those young ones were really something. Listen, there was just so much in there, so many false arguments and bits of information that were left out or not explained fully, that I thought the easiest thing to do was just put the captions in. I think to summarize what we've just seen, we have essentially two groups of people recommending pioneer service. We have young Jehovah's Witnesses being put in front of the camera who have made the decision for themselves without any real experience, probably without any great knowledge of the organisation and its history. They're literally simply products of child indoctrination. I think it's safe to assume for at least the majority of them. And on the basis of their recommendation, young witnesses who are watching this video are supposed to make a make or break decision that could affect their entire lives. And then the other group of people you'll have seen where the young pioneer talks about speaking with older pioneers and trying to get their advice on whether to pursue this as a career. And quite obviously, as I point out in the caption, if you approach someone for advice who has wasted years of their lives, or should I say invested years of their lives in doing something, the answer you get will depend on whether they have learned or given themselves permission to learn that it was a waste of time. Because if they've invested all of that time in doing something, they are going to be biased. They're not going to want to admit that it was a waste of time. They're going to want to believe themselves that what they were doing was worthwhile, because the alternative is for them to say, what on earth was I doing? Think of all of the days, weeks, months, years that I was trudging around streets, trying to convince total strangers that I had the one and only true religion. They're not going to do that, are they? Unless they have awoken from their indoctrination. If they're still in their indoctrination, of course you're going to get a positive answer, an answer that says, yes, I don't regret it at all, and you should do the same thing. But now it's time to be blown away by Stephen Lett's teaching ability. And I think we all need to sit back now and appreciate just how quickly and effectively a master teacher like Stephen Lett can explain a fairly rudimentary idea.
Jesus was the wisest man who ever walked the earth. He could have pursued any career and truly excelled at it. He could have been the greatest carpenter who ever lived. Think about it. He helped his father build the physical universe. Can you imagine what kind of houses he could have built? Or what if he had pursued being an inventor? With his perfect brain, he probably could have invented the telephone, automobile, or computer in the first century. Or what about becoming a businessman? With perfect intelligence, he likely could have come out on top of every business transaction that he entered, becoming the richest businessman who ever lived. Or have you ever thought about if he had pursued becoming an athlete? And excelling in athletic contests was a huge endeavor in Jesus' day. With a little training, it is likely that his perfect body would have outperformed all people with imperfect bodies, enabling him to become the most famous athlete who ever lived. Or one more example, what if he had decided to become a doctor? He could cure sick people, even raise the dead. Can you imagine how much he could have charged rich people to raise their dead loved ones?
Maybe you, like me, were not completely blown away by Stephen Lett's teaching ability here. I mean, he had one idea to express, which was Jesus was a perfect man, therefore he could have been brilliant at anything he turned his attention to. Instead, he chose to be a preacher and representative of God. That's all you need to say. Instead, because Stephen Lett believes this is such a profound idea that witnesses are incapable of fathoming unless it's explained in excruciating detail, we have this rambling spectacle of him going on about all of the different permutations of different careers or professions or avenues that Jesus could have explored. Bear in mind, Stephen Lett is supposed to be the product of decades of theocratic ministry school education and the beneficiary of a lifetime of experience in giving speeches and talks and trying to convey ideas to people. And this is the sum total. This is what he's capable of doing now. After all of that experience, this is the height of his skills as a governing body member. The other point I wanted to make was that last point about what if Jesus had become a doctor and got involved in the business of healing people and or raising them from the dead. Now, as far as the raising from the dead thing is concerned, I'm not convinced that that is so much to do with being a perfect human being. I think that's more to do, unless I'm reading my Bible wrong, I believe that was more to do with power from God or using the Holy Spirit. Stephen seems to be blurring the difference between Jesus acting on God's behalf and wielding God's Holy Spirit and being a perfect human being.
But Jesus pursued none of these careers. Why? Because he knew that any of such endeavors would have only very limited and temporary benefits. Instead, he pursued something he knew would bring far-reaching and everlasting benefits: the full-time ministry. If this is how the wisest man who ever walked the earth, if this is how he reasoned, we are wise if we strive to think the same way.
Notice there the clever use of language. So Stephen Lett there says that Jesus made the decision as the wisest man to pursue the full-time ministry. That's not an expression you will see in the Bible. It's an expression that's used by Jehovah's Witnesses. A Jehovah's Witness who goes to Bethel, or a Jehovah's Witness who pioneers, or a Jehovah's Witness who becomes a missionary, they're all considered to be in the full-time ministry. And what Stephen Lett is doing is he's saying, well, look at Jesus. He was essentially in the full-time ministry. If the wisest man in the world could make that decision, then don't you think you ought to do it too? Don't you think you might be less wise than the perfect Jesus, and that you should listen to what Jesus has to say on this? The false argumentation and patronizing condescension and blatant manipulation is just obvious.
That makes me think of the comments of a well-adjusted teenage brother whom we served while in the circuit work many years ago. This young brother went straight into the regular pioneer work out of high school, and I asked him why he did so. He explained that he knew he could have gotten a full-time secular job and bought a new car for himself, but he reasoned that in a few years that car would rust out and break down, and he would have nothing. But he knew that he could go into the pioneer work and build a close relationship with Jehovah, and perhaps even find an honest-hearted person and be able to teach that one the truth. And he knew that would last forever. Now that is some wise thinking on the part of that young brother.
Hopefully I don't need to spell out the red herrings in Stephen's argument here. Firstly, nothing lasts forever. And if Stephen wants to convince us that by becoming pioneers we're guaranteed everlasting life in a paradise earth, he needs to present evidence to prove it. It's not enough to say, well, I'm speaking for God and everything I say is based on the Bible, unlike everyone else who says that what they say is based on the Bible, so just trust me on this. No, Stephen, you need to present evidence, especially when you're making arguments with the aim of coercing young people to give up their futures. The other major red herring is that Stephen is trying to convince us that the only aim of going to college and university or pursuing a career is to get a car. Apparently Stephen has managed to convince himself that pretty much the only thing you do if you're not a Bethelite or pioneer is spend your time working to save up for cars. I would argue that that's not actually true. I would argue that yes, money can be spent on nice material things, such as the nice watch he's wearing, or the pinky ring he used to wear in the first few episodes of JW Broadcasting, which is mysteriously vanished from his finger. Yes, money can be spent on things like that, or on useful machinery, which is essentially what a car is, but it can also be spent on furthering the human experience, on helping people. It can be spent on charity, it can be spent on charitable giving, on furthering good causes. It can be spent on bettering yourself. It can be spent on tuition, on education. It can be spent on travel. And travel is a fantastic way of improving your perspective of seeing how different cultures and different peoples live, and taking that experience and using it to broaden your mind and make better decisions about your own life. Stephen is presenting a false picture of what is involved in not being a regular pioneer or not being a Bethelite, and he needs to be called out on it.
But if you young ones are going to think this way and continue to pursue spiritual goals, it is vital that you wisely choose your associates. In a sense, our associates can be likened to an elevator. What do we mean? Well, they can take you up or they can take you down. If you choose wisely, they will take you up, elevate your good qualities, and make you a better person. But if you choose poorly, they will take you down. Depending on how badly you choose, they can take you way down to the basement, even the sub-basement.
Two things here. This is a perfect example of the governing body's black and white thinking. Everything is us versus them. Everything is evil or good. Everything is very, very painful or very, very uplifting. And we have it there in spades in the elevator analogy. Everybody you encounter can either take you up or drag you down. There's no in between. There's no acknowledgement of how complex human relationships are and how people rub off on us, but we also rub off on them. Everything is purely about reinforcing the idea that everybody who isn't a Jehovah's Witness is out to get you and is out to drag you down to their depths of depravity. The other thing to point out is the irony that Stephen Lett's illustration applies perfectly to getting involved in cults. Because this is what happens when you get roped into a cult. And again, if you're a young Jehovah's Witness watching this, it's not your fault by any means if you've been born into an organization that puts your welfare second and its own prosperity first. But there are people who do get coerced and are intercepted at a vulnerable moment in their lives. And perhaps they're very depressed, perhaps they're upset because they've just lost someone. A Jehovah's Witness comes knocking on the door and says, well, guess what? All you need to do is X, Y, and Z. All you need to do is obey and follow unquestioningly this group of leaders in New York, and you can have everything. You can have your dead loved ones back. You can live in a perfect utopia. We're offering you everything if you'll only do this. I would argue that that is harmful. I would argue that that is getting in the elevator and going down to the basement when you could be going up, or at least carrying on with your life and doing the best you can.
At Proverbs 13:20, our loving Heavenly Father, who made us, explains how it works. Jehovah tells us there, the one walking with the wise will become wise, but the one who has dealings with the stupid will fare badly. Walking with and having dealings with means associating with. And who are the stupid ones? Well, this scripture contrasts such a person with those who are wise. It is not talking about someone who lacks mental intellect.
Whoa, what was that?
Mental intellect.
Stephen, I think we need to hear you say mental intellect one more time.
Mental intellect. It is talking about someone who does not make wise decisions spiritually from Jehovah's standpoint. And if we think about it, anyone who is not really serving Jehovah, at least right now, that one is unwise indeed. And if we associate closely with such ones, Jehovah says that we will fare badly.
So we've had this before on Watchtower videos, but I think it needs flagging each and every time they do it because it's extremely insulting. But if you just happen to be watching this video and you've never been a Jehovah's Witness, you're just interested in the religion, maybe you're studying with them, maybe you have family who you know are Jehovah's Witnesses, you're just interested basically in, you know, what the leaders of the religion have to say. I just want to kind of raise a flag here and help you to appreciate the contempt with which you are held according to witness teachings. So we had a scripture read from Proverbs 13:20 that said that if you associate with stupid ones, you will fare badly. And Stephen Lett, a governing body member, has here just said that if you're not serving Jehovah, in other words, if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, you are one of those stupid ones. So for emphasis, he is saying, and I am not misrepresenting him here, I am not exaggerating, Stephen Lett, a governing body member, is saying that if you are not a Jehovah's Witness, you are stupid. Just wanted to make that clear.
We could use another illustration. Think about someone who is physically sick and is running a high fever. If we spend a lot of time with that person, we will probably catch the same sickness. Or worse, if we spend a lot of time near a dead body, a corpse, we will probably pick up a disease. Well, it is similar with spending time with a person who is spiritually sick, or worse, spiritually dead. On the other hand, if we choose as our associates those who love Jehovah and who are building their everlasting future with Jehovah, we will benefit greatly.
Again, let the record show that a governing body member, Stephen Lett, has here just insulted everybody who is not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, that religion that is very polite and well-mannered and is smiling when they stand next to the carts and is asking your opinion on things, asking how you feel about certain world developments, what your opinions are. What they're being instructed to think is that if they were to be friends with you, it would be similar to them catching or being close to someone with a contagious disease, or it would be like hanging out in a morgue with dead people. Let's just make it clear that's essentially what he was just saying.
And if we think about it, in the final analysis, after all is said and done, whether we're younger or older, our net worth will be what we have stored up in heaven with Jehovah. We will not be able to take material treasures with us through the Great Tribulation. And if we die, we certainly will not be able to take material treasures with us. But we can take spiritual treasures with us through the Great Tribulation and even through death and resurrection.
This video, in my opinion, could be used to help educate psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health counselors, because it is just a textbook example of cultic manipulation. So in this particular segment, we've already had the bit about people who aren't in the cult being stupid or being comparable to people with a contagious disease or even corpses. We've had all that already. Now we're being told that unless you're a Jehovah's Witness, unless you are committing your life to serving an organization, which Stephen Lett just happens to be one of the leaders of, your life is worthless. And actually, there is nothing that you can do in this life that is meaningful in any sense unless it is directed at helping Jehovah's organization. That is black and white, us versus them, cultic manipulation, classic propaganda, and I, for one, in a way, I'm glad that it's being done so blatantly and by somebody who looks so insincere, so fake, and so full of himself.
And how encouraging it is to see young ones getting baptized, publicly demonstrating that they're giving their lives to Jehovah. And we sincerely hope that you young ones who are not yet baptized will not hold back from getting baptized as soon as you qualify. The sooner you can get baptized, the sooner you will receive greater protection and blessings from Jehovah. Not long ago, it made me very happy to observe a little 10-year-old brother get baptized. And young ones, never be afraid to identify yourself as one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay, this for me is one of the most despicable elements of Watchtower teachings, and it's this whole thing with child baptism. I don't know whether it's getting worse. I sense that things are different from when I was a witness, but there's so much pressure in the current Jehovah's Witness culture for kids to get dunked. And notice what Stephen Lett was just saying towards the end. Oh, there's no need to be afraid of identifying yourself as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. In other words, if you don't get baptized as a JW while you're a child, you are a coward. He is essentially saying, chicken, scaredy cat, if you're not getting baptized. I mean, that is gutter level manipulation. That's playground level manipulation. And we're talking about something whereby once the child is baptized, as I said in that caption, they are liable to being disfellowshipped and shunned by everyone they know. Cut off from their parents, cut off from their family, if they get baptized and later either change their minds or do something that Stephen Lett and his buddies have said is wrong. Honestly, child baptism and the ages that we're talking about, I'm going to be referring to this later, the ages that we're talking about when it comes to children getting baptized, we're now frequently hearing ages like 10 or 9 or even 8. Now, for goodness sake, how is an 8 or 9-year-old supposed to know what their religious beliefs will be for their entire lives? We're talking about a completely different person to how they will be when they're older. The only thing I have in common with the Lloyd Evans who existed when he was 8 years old is my DNA. That's the only thing I have in common. My DNA, maybe certain features, everything else about that entity that existed in my body when I was 8 is completely different. Knowledge, experience, personality, ideas, outlook, views, opinions. I am completely different in every way. So how can Watchtower justify pushing children to make a commitment that they will be held to for the rest of their lives? It's absolutely disgusting.
Many years ago, when I was in school, I can remember being, at times, somewhat worried about how my fellow classmates would view me. But then a little while later, I got out of school and never ever again even saw most of those former classmates. Then it dawned on me. it doesn't really matter what people think about us. It is Jehovah's rating of us that truly counts.
So again, the reason why Stephen Lett is saying all this is to pursue this argument of, well, if you're not getting baptized as a JW like mummy and daddy, it must be because you're afraid. And his argument here is there's no reason to be afraid, because who are you afraid of? People at school? You're not going to know them once you've left school, once you've become an adult, once you've moved to serve as the leader of a worldwide cult in New York. Honestly, the argumentation is just so juvenile and assuming that the reason why, the only thing preventing someone from getting baptized is fear of their classmates. That's not how it works at all. The reason why Jehovah's Witness children should not be getting baptized and why it's wrong for their parents or for Stephen or for any of his buddies to coerce 8, 9 or 10-year-olds to be getting baptized is because they are not adults. It's a cheap, cynical way of adding to the numbers. I mean, think about it. You know, Watchtower takes great pride in its numbers and in how many people it has preaching. And the fact that there are 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses who are regularly preaching the good news. Well, we now know, or we have known for some time, thanks to this propaganda, that a good percentage of that 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses are actually kids. Some of them won't even be in high school yet, some of that 8 million. Another percentage will be in high school, but they're not even old enough to have a job or own property or get into a contract. They're not adults, they're minors. And Watchtower is so desperate for numbers, so desperate to post figures on the board, that they're willing to resort to this gutter level going after kids. It's just so wrong.
Humans cannot add even 5 seconds to our lifespan.
That's actually not true. I'm going to now show you a graph that will indicate the average life expectancy in the United Kingdom over the last few centuries, and hopefully you will see that there has been a dramatic increase in life expectancy just in my country of birth, the United Kingdom, over the last few hundred years. And it's because of human ingenuity, better health care, people becoming doctors, people figuring out how the human body works, new drugs being introduced. All of that is human driven. Stephen Lett very likely has reached this age, this old senile age, because of healthcare, because of humans figuring out how to improve the quality of their lives and make themselves live longer. So what he's just said about humans not being able to add any time to their lifespan is just a load of nonsense.
But Jehovah can add or subtract eternity, and He alone can also give us true happiness.
This is another myth that we repeatedly hear in Watchtower propaganda videos, that by becoming a Jehovah's Witness, you will receive happiness. Do you want to be happy? Do you want to be fulfilled? Do you want to be stress-free? The thing to do is to become a Jehovah's Witness. Well, I'm sorry, but personal experience as one of Jehovah's Witnesses completely eviscerates that idea. All you need to do is spend time in a JW congregation, look around, ask a few questions, get to know people. What you will find is that there are just as many people who are depressed and just as many people who are on antidepressants and receiving some form of therapy for stress and depression as in any other community or demographic. Probably it could be argued that you're more likely to be depressed as a Jehovah's Witness, because life as a Jehovah's Witness is just one long hamster wheel of not quite doing enough. You know, are you a publisher? Well, you know, maybe you should be pioneering. Are you pioneering? Well, you know, maybe you should be, you know, going to Gilead, and maybe you should be becoming a Bethelite. Or honestly, there is always something that you should be doing that's better than what you're doing now as a Jehovah's Witness. And that does create a tremendous amount of pressure.
Never be ashamed of who you are. You are one of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Not anymore.
And please, dear young ones, we warmly encourage you to listen to those who love you. Jehovah loves you very much. The governing body loves you very much.
Do they now? Well, that's a new one on me. Apparently, the governing body loves young ones, loves children. The governing body loves children. Not quite enough, if we're honest. Not quite enough to stop covering up child abuse. Not quite enough to put measures in place that will protect children by making it mandatory for elders to go to the authorities the minute they hear of an accusation of child molestation. Not quite enough for that. But apart from that, the governing body really does love children.
The elders love you very much. Your Christian parents love you very much. And these ones will tell you the truth, even though at times it may not be what you want to hear. They will not tickle your ears, perhaps like ones at school or in the neighborhood who don't really love you or have your best interest at heart.
Okay, there's two things here, and actually, as I'm filming this, Deanna is working on her computer and she's listening to me playing Stephen Lett's bits, and she's fuming at what she's listening to. I almost asked her to come and do this next segment, but apparently she's not ready for it. But wow, let's just point out the two big issues with what Stephen Lett's just said. First of all, love, the concept of love, everything about love when you're a Jehovah's Witness is conditional. And if you don't believe me, well, there's two things you could do. First of all, if you're a young Jehovah's Witness who has got baptized at some insanely young age, you can see what happens with your parents, see how loving they are when you turn around to them and say, I no longer believe this. I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. See how loving they are then. Yeah? Or if you're not a young one, if you are an adult Jehovah's Witness and you have all your friends in the Kingdom Hall, in the congregation, just as an experiment, just as a laugh, wait for your turn when you're commenting during the meeting, and just give a comment to the effect of, you're all my friends, I love you all to bits, and I'm a believer in the Bible, I love God, I love Jesus, I just don't think the governing body are his representatives on earth. Try saying that in a Kingdom Hall and see how much love gets thrown your way. I think more likely you're going to be thrown into the back room and given a serious talking to by the elders. That's what love means when you're a Jehovah's Witness. So I'm sorry, Stephen, you cannot go around bragging about love in your cult because it's all based on serving you. The other obvious thing, or at least it was obvious to me, is when he talks about tickling ears. So he points to people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, people at school, let's say careers advisors. I'm sure that's the sort of thing he has in mind. Maybe teachers who are giving advice to a young Jehovah's Witness child or a teenager saying, you know, you should consider university. Stephen is suggesting that that sort of advice is tickling the ears. And for those who don't know what that phrase means, it's taken from the Bible, and it essentially means saying nice things to someone to win them over. I would argue that the entire Jehovah's Witness religion is set up around tickling the ears and telling people what they want to hear. So as I said before, if a Jehovah's Witness calls on someone who has recently lost a dear loved one, well, don't worry, you're going to see them again. Everything's going to be better. You're going to be reunited with the child who's just died, with your baby who you've just lost, with your parent that's just passed away. We can guarantee that you'll see them again if you will only come with us and place all of your obedience and trust in our leaders. That, I'm sorry, that is tickling the ears.
And never view Jehovah's laws and principles as depriving you of something good. View them as protecting you from what will hurt you.
Yes, so for example, Jehovah's laws and principles concerning blood transfusions. That is all about protecting Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're in hospital and the doctor tells you that you have hours left unless you accept a blood transfusion, it's a protection for you if you die by refusing blood. That's such a protection. You know, you'd be missing out really if you gave in and received the blood. You would definitely be missing out by surviving. The truth is, while it can't be said that every single teaching and every single command that comes from the governing body is harmful per se, there are a number of deeply detrimental teachings that do deprive people of fairly basic things. As I mentioned earlier, and as viewers to this channel will be only too aware, if you are a Jehovah's Witness with family who are Jehovah's Witnesses and you end up changing your mind and leaving them, they will be commanded to shun you on penalty of being destroyed at Armageddon if they don't. How on earth is that a protection for you? How is that an area in which you would be deprived if you didn't have that provision from the governing body?
If you recall, Satan convinced Eve that she was being deprived by Jehovah and was missing out on something good. Now, it is true that Eve was missing out on something. But what was she really missing out on? A tormented conscience. Her beautiful hair turning gray. Her teeth falling out. Her perfect skin wrinkling up like a prune. Being bent over from old age. Hobbling around on a cane. And finally dying. But Satan convinced her that Jehovah was depriving her. So foolishly, she reached out to get what she thought she was missing out on. Well, Satan will try to use the same kind of strategy on you. But please, don't let him do it.
Again, the lack of sincerity in this guy. It's like some kind of comedy show, but it's real. This is not a spoof. This is how he is actually talking. And he believes that by giving this really fake auto cue performance that he's going to be convincing people. I, for one, am not convinced. But let's just go back and think about what he's just been saying. He's using the same tactic that was used in one of the very first Caleb and Sophia videos of saying to impressionable young Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, of singling them out and saying to them, if you don't do X, Y, Z, if you don't obey us, if you don't do everything that we require of you, including in the Caleb and Sophia case, getting rid of a plastic toy that might upset God. If you don't do that, look at this scary picture of Adam and Eve growing old. Look at this scary picture of them with, long grey hair and, wrinkled skin and bent over and hobbling on a cane. Think of that outcome and how bad it was for them and how terrible they felt when they missed out on the opportunity of serving God. That will be your outcome. You will die a miserable death. You will go into your old age and your life will just be meaningless. That's the message that Stephen Lett is giving to young people.
This also makes me think of an experience a brother once related. He said that he was visiting an animal observatory and a large lion lunged toward him, but was prevented from reaching him by a thick glass pane, separating the animals from the observers. As the lion stood on his hind legs, clawing the glass and baring his massive teeth, the brother came to realize in a special way the protective value of that barrier. Previously, he said that he somewhat viewed the glass pane as a restriction because the smudges on it partially blurred his view. But now he viewed it as a real protection. Well, in a similar way, Jehovah doesn't want Satan, who is described as a roaring, devouring lion at 1 Peter 5:8. He doesn't want him to gobble down you young ones. And his laws and principles are designed to keep that from happening to you. So please, listen to Jehovah. He loves you.
Hopefully the fear-mongering and just general creepiness and lack of sincerity doesn't need any commentary. Hopefully it's just all self-evident. I just wanted to talk about the teaching ability again, because don't forget, this is supposed to be one of the faithful and discreet slave, the pinnacle of what Jehovah's organization is supposed to be able to produce in terms of teaching and in terms of dispensing spiritual food. And this is the level at which he's speaking to his audience. This kind of first grade school teacher level of discussion, of dialogue. I would really struggle with this. I hope I would struggle with it if I was a JW. I mean, as I may have mentioned, I recently met with somebody who's only just been waking up and who's been going to the meetings, and one of the first things I wanted to know was, are Jehovah's Witnesses, how are they responding to the JW broadcasting episodes? And she said, oh, they love them. They can't get enough of them. So I guess at some level, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you're wanting to believe that it's somehow, profound. And if it seems simple, it's actually not simple. If it seems simple, it means you need to think about it some more. And there's something that you're missing that Stephen Lett knows, and you need to kind of read between. No, I'm sorry. It's just basic bog standard reasoning that is basically aimed at people with the similarly low intellect that Stephen has. I'm sorry, that's just what it is. This is not a bright person. This is not a clever person. This is, as we've heard from Stephen's own lips before, not an educated person. This is just somebody who believes that unless you follow his words, you're going to be gobbled up by a lion.
The new school wasn't much better. Until I met Cameron. He seemed like a pretty cool guy. Soon, his friends became my friends.
Oh dear, a Jehovah's Witness youth is making friends with somebody who is not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, this can only end in tears.
Believed was true. He actually proved it by the association that he kept. If we think about one of the closest friendships recorded in the scriptures, it was that of David and Jonathan. What was it that David and Jonathan shared in common? It wasn't their age.
Akil, you were texting in the meeting.
I shouldn't have sent the text. I'm sorry. But Cameron is a good person. He might even study one day.
I understand that, Akil. But we all have to be careful with how much time we spend with people that don't love Jehovah. See, their values are just different. You know what Proverbs 13:20 says? Walk with those who are wise. So why don't you seek out friends who love Jehovah? And you will make friends that last a lifetime.
Yes, Akil, just think about what Proverbs 13:20 says, which, as we've just heard from Stephen Lett, says that those who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses are stupid. And let's also bear in mind that if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, hanging out with you is like hanging out with someone with a contagious disease or hanging out with a dead body. Just bear that in mind, Akil.
The next day, Cameron posted pictures of a party he had. My parents were right. I broke off my association with Cameron and his friends.
Naughty, naughty Cameron, you're not allowed to have parties, especially high school parties that aren't moderated in some way by Jehovah's Witness parents or elders, especially if there's alcohol. As we already learned in the Worst Convention Ever series of videos, check out that series if you don't know what I'm talking about. In that series, there was a video where two girls were debating whether to go to a high school party, and there were some scenes shown of what this party might entail, which I can only assume are similar to the scenes that Cameron is showing on his phone and he's excited about. And it was just an ordinary party. Bottom line, Watchtower doesn't think that Jehovah's Witness youths should be socializing outside of school with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. That's what it's about. There wasn't anyone murdered at this party. There wasn't anything necessarily evil happening. It was just a case of you're not supposed to associate with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. But don't worry, Akil, because one of the stars of Zoolander is about to come to your rescue.
Hi, Akil. Do you have field service plans for Saturday?
No.
Good, now you do. I'll see you at the 9:30 meeting, okay?
Yay! A 9:30 Saturday meeting for field service. That sounds like so much fun.
After service, Max had the group over for refreshments. Did you take these?
You like them?
Yeah.
My wife, she was always the photographer. She loved photography. And then one anniversary, she went out and bought me a camera. And from that moment on, I was hooked too. Time flies so quickly, it's hard to believe she passed away 12 years ago now.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But you still take pictures?
I do. I really enjoy photography. There's something about being close to Jehovah's creation. It reminds me that we're never really alone, you know?
Ah yes, Jehovah's creation. So comforting. Creatures like mosquitoes, poisonous snakes, scorpions. All of these things remind us how much Jehovah loves us and how we're not alone. My own personal favourite is something that you can read about on the Skeptic's Annotated Bible. It's the guinea worm, and this is an image representing its life cycle. Allow me to read to you what it says on the Skeptic's Annotated Bible about the guinea worm. I will provide a link. It says, guinea worm larvae are released by their mothers into a body of water. The larvae thrash around vigorously until they attract and are eaten by a copepod, which is a small, nearly microscopic crustacean. The copepod is, however, just a temporary home for the worm. It cannot complete its life cycle unless it can somehow get inside its definitive host, a human being. This is accomplished when someone drinks water containing the infected copepods. The copepod's body is destroyed by the stomach acids, releasing the guinea worm, which then burrows its way through the intestinal wall. It begins to migrate through the abdominal cavity and into the connective tissue, stopping along the way to mate with another migrating worm that it runs into along the way. By this time, females have grown to be nearly a metre in length, while the males are only a few centimetres. After the worms have sex, the little male wanders off to find a place to die, while the female continues her journey through the human body. While the migration of the female worms causes great pain and discomfort, it is when the worm reaches its final destination that the torment really begins. The worms end up just beneath the surface of the skin, usually in the legs or feet, where they remain for a month or more. Their metabolic wastes and the host's allergic reaction cause a blister to form, resulting in intense itching and burning pain. One of the few ways to relieve the pain is to immerse the blister in water, inducing the worm to break through the surface of the skin, releasing millions of guinea worm larvae. A copepod eats the larvae, completing the guinea worm life cycle. What a charming creature that Jehovah has created there. A creature that is designed to eat its way through a human being, causing intense pain.
It was just like David and Jonathan. Their friendship was based not on age, but on their love for Jehovah. And they helped each other. And with Max's help, I was able to keep a good spiritual routine without interruption. Although we weren't the same age, Max became my good friend. I just needed to see what was right in front of me.
Yes, friends can come in various ages. And the best kind of friend is one who encourages us in our service to Jehovah.
In fact, that's the only kind of friend. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, there literally are no other candidates for friends apart from other Jehovah's Witnesses.
My girlfriend had been to meetings as a child, so she basically dragged me to the Kingdom Hall. They treated me nice. And that's when I started to get to know Omar. So I started hanging around with him and his wife, me and my girlfriend at the time, going to meetings. But it wasn't until I found out this guy used to be one of my rivals. I was very, very upset. Felt betrayed because he never told me. Everything that was going through my head was, I gotta find a way to get him over here so I can hurt him.
So this is one of those stories that frequently gets shown on JW Broadcasting episodes that depicts someone who has become a Jehovah's Witness after living this terrible life before he was introduced to the organization. The implication being that it's impossible to be a well-rounded, compassionate, ordinary, kind, pleasant person unless you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And in this particular guy's case, he goes from being introduced to the witnesses and quickly wanting to do very nasty things to one of them. Apparently everyone this guy encounters, if you watch the whole thing, almost everyone he encounters has some kind of connection with gang violence, including at the Kingdom Hall. But never mind, because in this case, he becomes a Jehovah's Witness and they all live happily ever after.
I'm no longer a violent person. I enjoy the privileges that Jehovah now gives me. I have now been serving as a ministerial servant for the past 2 years. I am in charge of the accounting for the Kingdom Hall instead of stealing money as I used to do before. What I do for a living is I do gardening work. Now I don't carry around knives, but I carry around my tools. You could say that I did beat my pistols into plowshares now, or weed whacker, or lawnmower. I'm glad that I'm now serving a great God who is loving, caring, and forgiving.
Again, the implication is it's impossible to lead a happy, meaningful, fulfilled life unless you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're probably going to get involved in a gang or be addicted to drugs or involved in something else that's generally unpleasant or antisocial. Only being a Jehovah's Witness will protect you from this.
Jeremiah 17:13 conveys the thought that those who do not serve Jehovah will have their names written in the dust. But by building your future with Jehovah, you young ones are ensuring that Jehovah will keep your individual names written in His book of life.
So again, if you're watching my channel and it just so happens that you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you're not an ex-witness, you're just generally curious about what these people believe, how they perceive people like you and others, if you're taking notes, it's worthwhile just bearing in mind that in addition to being comparable with someone with a contagious disease, with a corpse, in addition to being outright called a stupid person, you should know that your name is going to be written in the dust.
Whether it was in the kitchen, or night watch, where the early 5 a.m. starts with the concrete crew at 10 degrees, their joy and their humility was outstanding to accept any work that needed to be done.
And a lot of young ones, brothers and sisters, moved into the area so they could commute.
And they would work day after day tirelessly, into the evenings even, to have the project ready for the next day. Their energy was just astonishing.
Jehovah loves young ones, and He's willing to invest in them and train them.
Again, Jehovah loves young ones, just not quite enough to implement policies whereby they're protected from pedophiles. Hopefully you will also see this particular segment focusing on young ones who are participating in building property for Watchtower. Apparently property is a really big deal for Jehovah. He needs people to build him buildings. Buildings is what he really, really likes, which isn't quite the same way as God is depicted in, I don't know, Acts 17 verse 24. The God who made the world and all the things in it, being as He is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in handmade temples.
We knew, and they knew, that they were building not just a project at Warwick, they were building a spiritual project for Jehovah.
You could see Jehovah's Spirit operating on them.
You could actually see Jehovah's Spirit operating on them. That's incredible. It's just a shame there were no cameras around to capture this, because that would have been evidence.
The highest quality of life is when, as clay, we put ourselves in the hands of the great potter Jehovah, and we say, "Here I am, send me." And I'm fully confident they will have no regrets building their future with Jehovah.
That's the scripture that was often used, or that I often remember being used when I was a Jehovah's Witness. That scripture about Jehovah being a potter. I now think of that scripture in a completely different light, because I realize I was being molded, but not by Jehovah. I was being manipulated, is the correct term, manipulated and shaped into a different person than I really was by an organization that just wanted to suck the energy and time out of me for its own interests.
By the way, you may find it interesting to know that the Warwick and Wallkill construction projects were not funded by the donations that you have made to the worldwide work. Your donations are being used to support the work in the worldwide field. The massive construction projects at Warwick and Wallkill were funded by the sale of properties in Brooklyn. In effect, we just traded locations. We traded the value of the properties in Brooklyn for the beautiful facilities at Warwick and Wallkill. And I must say, the governing body is truly enjoying the new facility at Warwick, thanks to the hard work, both of the young and the older ones who labored in our behalf, and we truly appreciate it.
Of course, one way of showing your appreciation, Stephen, would be to not flat out lie to your audience. First of all, not every dollar that gets donated towards the worldwide work goes towards funding the work in the worldwide field if that work is purely to do with preaching, printing, that sort of thing. We know, we have evidence that contributions made to Watchtower are being spent on furthering Watchtower's policies regarding child abuse, on settling cases with victims, and even on paying fines that have been awarded against Watchtower for their mishandling of child molestation. That is not something that Stephen Lett is ever going to admit to in a JW Broadcasting episode. I accept that. But the very least he can do is not flat out lie to Jehovah's Witnesses and deceive them into thinking that their hard-earned donations to the worldwide work are only being spent on things to do with preaching or with building kingdom halls or with printing literature. That is simply not the case. The other infuriating area of outright deception in Stephen Lett's words here, well, it's partly deception and it's partly total lack of transparency. And in my view, the total lack of transparency is something Jehovah's Witnesses should feel insulted by, because they're being treated like children. They're having very relevant information withheld from them that could inform them in how much they donate to the organisation. Because what Stephen Lett hasn't said is that the total property transactions for the Brooklyn properties, as reported in the media, you're not going to hear any numbers quoted by Watchtower, but the numbers quoted so far in the media, I actually cite them in my book, but the numbers quoted indicate that Watchtower has made at least $1.25 billion by selling its Brooklyn properties. I actually believe the final total will be more like $1.5 billion, maybe even more, but at least $1.25 billion has been made already by Watchtower in selling off its Brooklyn properties. Now, when you think of that sum of money, and then you look at what's been done at Warwick and Wallkill. So Wallkill's been expanded so that they can do more printing there. And Warwick is the new headquarters, more of the administrative base of Jehovah's Witnesses. Again, no figures, there's been no transparency because no figures have been released so that witnesses can be informed on what's happening with their hard-earned donations. Instead, The only figure I'm aware of, which again has come through the media, is the figure of 11.5 million for Warwick. Now, I personally am doubtful that they managed to build Warwick for only $11.5 million. That seems like a very small sum of money for such a huge complex. But that's the only figure we have. And I'm happy, I would be delighted in fact, if Watchtower could be, again, transparent and say, this is how much it cost us, this is how much the land cost, this is how much the materials cost, this is how much we paid our contractors. What's so bad about them releasing that information? I think the reason why they're not releasing that information is because it would show immediately, if they did, that the amount of money that they have spent on Warwick in particular, and also Walkhill if you like, it would show that the amount of money that they've spent on those projects is a drop in the ocean compared to the $1.25 billion they made on Brooklyn. They have harvested an enormous sum of money from selling those properties, and in my book I argue that that is more out of desperation and necessity than anything else. They need that money because there is a tremendous imbalance in the channel of donations coming through at the moment that they're really struggling with, and they've needed to cash in their chips effectively by selling Brooklyn. And the reason they're not being transparent with the figures is because they don't want Jehovah's Witnesses to think, oh, well, if they made that much money selling Brooklyn, I don't need to donate.
In San Antonio, in the state of Texas, in the United States, a large convention with over 20,000 in attendance was planned. However, the venue could only provide about 1/3 of the chairs needed for the convention. Where would our brothers find the needed chairs?
The first thing I was asked to do was try and find a storage place that we could use for 6,000 to 8,000 chairs.
We had to unload the trucks. The brothers had to unstack the chairs, repair the chairs, clean the chairs. We got permission to ask the San Antonio congregations if we could use their chairs for the convention. We were hoping to get 3,000 chairs.
And then the numbers grew for the audience, so we had to increase our numbers. So
We were able to gather 6,000 chairs from the willing volunteers.
congregations around San Antonio. So
we prayed about it, and the brothers started asking for volunteers, and it was great cooperation.
We had thousands of chairs, every color, green, red, brown, blue. Even had some bright orange ones left out of the 70s, and we're putting them in the back. How do you make sections with straight rows when the chairs are all different sizes?
It just tells you that Jehovah is a God of order.
So it's because of Jehovah's hand and his blessing is why everything runs so smoothly.
What other organization? No one else can do that except Jehovah's people.
It truly is a fine witness when our young ones wholeheartedly give of their time.
So yes, that segment was about chairs. And I don't really have anything to add to it apart from to say that that has to be one of the most bizarre segments I've ever seen in a JW Broadcasting episode.
Proverbs 20:29 says, "The glory of young men is their strength."
I don't want you to work all day.
And commendably, you young men and women are using your strength to make a name with Jehovah.
Speaking of strength and youth, I can't help but notice, maybe I'm the only one, and this is not meant in any mean-spirited way or anything, but I can't help but notice that Stephen Lett appears to be quite frail on this episode. I was thinking about doing a comparison segment showing his different appearances over the last 2 or 3 years. I don't think I need to do that. I think, you know, it should be fairly obvious that he does seem to be a lot more gaunt and frail and thin than normal. There seems to be more of a gap in his collar as well, which shows that seems to indicate he's lost a lot of weight. But I just thought I'd make that observation for what it's worth.
Have you ever considered helping out in the foreign language field? Perhaps there is a need in your local circuit. All over the earth, the organization provides language courses with the goal of reaching every nation, tribe, tongue, and people with the good news of God's Word.
As I've mentioned on previous JW Broadcasting rebuttals, I actually like it when governing body members and helpers encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to go into the foreign language field by learning another language, because I actually think that, from my own experience, that's a fantastic way of just taking the foot off the pedal in terms of the intensity of propaganda that Jehovah's Witnesses receive. Because when I moved to Croatia, I mean, granted, I wasn't moving to Croatia necessarily to, you know, serve in another field or anything. It was just a case of literally moving to another country. But I personally found that the minute I started attending meetings in a language that I didn't understand, it was like the plug had been removed, and suddenly, like in the scene in The Matrix where, you know, they take the jack out of the brain almost. It was that sort of, okay, what do I really believe? And I know I'm not the only one. I've heard similar stories as well. For example, I'd recommend you Google Amber Scorer and read her article in the Believer magazine, in which she talks about what it was like learning Chinese and going to serve in China, where the work is actually under ban. But she found that by having to suddenly express these very distasteful beliefs in the Chinese language and dealing with people in the Chinese culture where they, you know, you have to be straight with them and you have to say things how they are. Eventually her faith unraveled by doing that. So I actually think it's great when governing body members encourage witnesses to go into the foreign language field.
Anteriormente les han dicho.
It has been said before.
Ese es un idioma.
This is a language of the devil.
Que deben olvidarse.
That it should be forgotten.
No les sirve.
It serves no purpose.
Para Jehová,
but to Jehovah,
ninguna nación.
No nation is insignificant.
I'm not entirely sure you can say that. Jehovah, when it comes to populating the paradise earth, Jehovah is very anxious to have it filled with people from Europe, Africa, or specifically Central and Southern Africa, and the Americas, and Australia, and 1 or 2 parts of Asia. Apart from that, he's not so keen on seeing Arabs, people from Muslim countries, or people from communist countries, such as China, for example. He's not so keen on seeing them. So there will be a disproportionate number of people from basically everywhere else, and not so many people from the countries I've just described. That is interesting if you think about it, because it flies in the face of what this chap has just said. If you're in the United States, the ratio there of Jehovah's Witnesses to non-Jehovah's Witnesses, it's 1 Jehovah's Witness to 263 Americans. So think of that, 1 Jehovah's Witness to 263 Americans. Go to Bangladesh, which is a vastly populated country. The ratio there is one Jehovah's Witness to 570,907. So it simply cannot be said that Jehovah is wanting to make sure that people from every nation are proportionally represented in paradise.
I received an invitation to attend a seminar for language instructors. There were 58 students in the class, representing 16 different languages or language groups.
You are going to be at the cutting edge of language instruction.
The cutting edge of language instruction. Whoa!
Yeah, I'm like a small child when it comes to drawing. I never learned to draw well.
I've drawn people running for their lives from Armageddon.
Our music video for this month is appropriately entitled Building My Future with Jehovah.
At times I wish I could see exactly what my future will be, and how my life will turn out, and which road is the right one for me. But one thing's for sure, no matter what comes along, I live for Jehovah, to Him I belong. Of all the people and things my life could be filled with, the best one of all, the best one to build with is my future with Him, every step that I take. All that I have, I'll never forget it. I'm safe in His hands, I'll never regret it.
An encouraging song indeed.
If you say so, Stephen. There's actually a couple of things I wanted to talk about in that horrendous music video. You'll have seen in the captions how horrendous it is that young Jehovah's Witnesses again are being sent into schools. You saw that kid with the leaflet being put in his bag. They're being sent into schools not just to learn, but to teach. Their job is to teach their classmates about Jehovah's kingdom. And we saw the clip in the science class of the girls sharing the creationist anti-science propaganda brochure about evolution. That is not what children go to school for, to spread misinformation and poorly researched and brochures strewn with misquotes from scientists. That's not what they're there to do. They go to school to learn.
We encourage all young ones to take the message of this program to build a future with Jehovah to heart. Prayerfully consider what you can do to expand your ministry. Always safeguard your most valuable possession, your precious relationship with Jehovah.
Most kids, most children who aren't raised as Jehovah's Witnesses get to spend their childhood being children, growing up in an atmosphere of unconditional love and support, and just being able to absorb knowledge without anyone saying, oh, you're not allowed to absorb this knowledge contradicts our official teachings. That's for most children. Jehovah's Witness children, on the other hand, have to be thinking while they're children of ways to expand their ministry. Yes, they have a job to do, and it's to preach to people while they're still children And while they themselves are in the process of being indoctrinated into the religion that's been decided for them, that's what being a young Jehovah's Witness is about.
Never forget that there are more with you than there are against you. It is true that Satan, the demons, and this world are against you. But your brothers and sisters, including the governing body, are with you. The angels are with you. The resurrected, immortal, anointed ones are with you. Jesus is with you. And most important, Jehovah is with you. You are never alone. To conclude, we have greetings to share with you from the special convention that was held in July of last year in Paris, France. You will be happy to know that 71 new sisters and 41 new brothers symbolized their dedication through water baptism. The oldest baptism candidate was an 80-year-old sister, and the youngest was a 10-year-old.
The youngest was a 10-year-old. Fantastic. I suppose that's at least some improvement on the experience that was given in the 2017 yearbook. I was baptized when I was 8. When I'm a bit older, I'm going to volunteer to help build kingdom halls, and I would like to work at Bethel. I'm 9 now, so I've not got long to go. Well, I mean, what more do I need to say? If you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness watching this video, please just take a moment to think about it. Ask yourself, how is this? How is baptizing children anything to be proud about?
Many of these dear young ones had to overcome peer pressure at school. Pressure to do things Jehovah does not like.
Well, there's any number of things Jehovah does not like. Hell, there's even a worksheet on how to use emojis correctly.
By taking the step of getting baptized, these brothers and sisters have shown that they want to build a future with Jehovah. Brothers and sisters, we love you very much. This is JW Broadcasting from the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses.
So that's the March 2017 JW Broadcasting episode featuring Stephen Lett. And I think you'll agree that even without any jokes or parodies or commentary, just on its own merits, it stands out as immediately creepy, as immediately culty, as immediately manipulative. These governing body members really have no hang-ups, no apprehensions when it comes to going after children and basically utilising them, exploiting them for their own purposes. Thankfully, sufficient numbers of people simply aren't buying it. I find it fascinating. When I was going through the yearbook figures in a previous video, I mentioned that there are quite significant countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Portugal, Poland, where so many people have basically got sick and tired of this sort of thing, of the manipulation, of the coercion, of the abusive policies. So many people have walked out of the door that all of those countries in the past year recorded deficits, recorded reductions in the number of Jehovah's Witnesses. I think that slowly but surely the tide really is turning, and just in the 5 years that I've been doing activism, I feel as though I've noticed an increase in the interest in YouTube videos, for example, the interest in blog articles, the amount of people on Reddit and in Facebook groups. I'm only seeing these numbers going up. I'm only seeing more interest, which indicates to me that despite all of these new provisions, despite all of these new initiatives such as CART Witnessing, such as JW.org, such as JW Broadcasting, despite trying all these things, Watchtower is just running out of steam. It's just not intended, it's not designed to survive in the 21st century when anybody can Google a lie or a misquote instantly and find out that they're being lied to. But that's about all I've got to say on this particular video. I will try to go back and do some of my older rebuttals that I missed out on. I'm obviously going to try and keep up to date from here on in with the April rebuttal and so on. In terms of the immediate future, I'm very excited to see what's going to happen at the Australian Royal Commission. It's going to be fascinating to see what conclusions they have reached. We will be covering it on JW Survey. In fact, we're going to be live tweeting about it apparently, Covert Fade tells me. So look out for that. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more videos, and as always, thank you for watching.